My name is Anna Sauerbrei. I'm the foreign editor at Die Zeit, and I'm happy to moderate this conversation. As you can see, 2 of the panelists are here with me on the stage, and 2 more are joining us digitally from around the world. I'm very happy to have you here, both digitally too. We will have about 1.5 hours for questions and the discussion, and I will take a couple of breaks to have your questions while we speak. Before I introduce the distinguished panelists here on the stage and digitally, I just wanted to get us started off with a little anecdote that maybe leads up to some of the questions that we want to raise on this panel, which is an anecdote from my daily life, and it is set in a bakery in my street. I've been there recently in line behind a woman who asked the employee for a loaf of whole grain spelt bread, which is a very German thing to do, to ask for that type of bread. Welcome, Francesca, to Berlin. And the bakery assistant says, sorry, we don't have it today.
And the customer goes, well, why don't you have it? And the bakery assistant says, well, the AI hasn't ordered it today. So she explained that the chain had recently rolled out an AI system which manages the orders for each of the stores of the chain. And the AI obviously hadn't ordered this type of bread previously on the night before. Before, it was managed, of course, by the shop assistants who would just give out orders on the evening. So the woman in front of me gets really upset, and she argues that this must be a mistake. Why wasn't her shopping behavior considered by the AI? She comes in almost every day to buy exactly that type of bread. She also asked whether the personnel in that store was feeding back to the AI, whether somebody had asked for something that wasn't there, and I thought it was a pretty good question. And what I found even more remarkable was that the shop assistant then went on to defend the AI and said, well, it's still new, it's still learning. And she sort of talked about it like a 4th grader who still isn't up to the task, really. And the customer left really frustrated. She felt that she had been treated unfairly by the AI. She doubted that it took a reasonable decision in not ordering that item, and wanted to immediately understand how the machinations behind the computer were actually working. So I thought this was a good lead up to our panel because it brings up some of the questions we want to raise here. The first is data quality and how can regulation guarantee the data quality. The second is bias. Is the data biased, in this case, negatively biased towards lovers of whole grain spelt bread? And third, it's fairness. She felt treated unfairness. And of course, there's the question of transparency, which is also ingrained in some of the AI legislation that we have seen. We will discuss all of these topics with a round of distinguished experts, both policymakers and scientists, and I will introduce them in alphabetic order. So let me welcome on the screen Brando Benifei from Italy. He's a member of the Partito Democratico. È stato rieletto. Congratulations. He was just re-elected as a member of the European Parliament, where he was the rapporteur on the AI Act. We have here to my left Francesca Bria. She's an innovation economist and digital policy expert, and among many other things, she's honorary professor at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at University College London, and she has advised the European Commission and the United Nations, among others, on AI policies. Alena Bix, to my right, she's a professor of ethics in medicine and health technologies at TU Munich and a former chair of the German Ethics Council. She has just left that but joined other consultatory gremiums of the German government. Now she's joined a panel on health and resilience. And those of you who are Germans will know her from the television screen because she has intervened often in the discussions during the COVID pandemic. And last but not least, joining virtually too is Emma Kark. She's the executive director of AI Now Institute, an independent think tank that does not accept funding from companies in the field. She's also a member of the board of the Signal Foundation and has also been advising diverse policy institutions, both in the United States and elsewhere, Congress, the White House, and the European Commission, to name just a few. One further housekeeping thing before we really start is that Brando Benifei will not be able to stay throughout the whole of the discussion. He will have to leave at 4:30. So we will start off with him. We will have brief introductory statements by each of you and then get the discussion going and, of course, get to your questions too. Brando, do you want to start? The floor is yours.
Unfortunately, I had today a meeting for the constitution of the parliament, and so I couldn't be with you in person, but I'm really happy for this opportunity and for this discussion. I think it's very timely because the AI Act was just signed yesterday, and so now 20 days before the moment when it enters the official gazette of the European Union and it becomes a law of the Union. Then we start a process of implementation, which will take some time. And it will be crucial to discuss with universities, with academics, with these various stakeholders to do in the best way this implementation process, and also to start a form of anticipated voluntary compliance, which I think will be very important to start practicing with what this legislation is. So I've been working on this for the last 2.5 years for the approval of this legislation, which is the first in the world to deal with AI with a thorough classification based on levels of risk, deciding even to prohibit some use cases of AI. And this is something that is to some extent peculiar to this legislation, because the whole of this law, you can see it's based on existing good practices to reduce risks and to increase transparency. But clearly prohibiting some uses can only be done with the law. So it's a peculiarity. And we prohibited the use of biometric cameras in public spaces for surveillance objectives, except for certain limited uses. We have prohibited the emotion recognition of workers and students. We have prohibited the predictive policing. So we have chosen to limit in Europe which kind of products of AI are acceptable, because we think this is linked to our system of values, of ideas that we think should be underpinning our concept of how we want to use AI in Europe. And for high-risk use cases, we have selected a series of contexts of use that we think should be checked carefully. So in terms of data, the appropriateness and quality of data, cybersecurity, human control. I'm referring to areas like the workplaces, the medical use, the administration of justice, the evaluation of students, etc. And in all these cases, we are going to ask the developers to check a series of parameters to ensure safety. And also we have ensured transparency so that we can fight the abuse of deepfakes, the use of fake videos and audios used to promote disinformation or even criminal behavior, cyberbullying, etc. So you see, we have tackled very different aspects with this legislation, including, I only mention it briefly because I would take too much time, the protection of copyrighted material created by creators so that we can defend the value of human creativity. And all this legislation is based on the idea that we can build more trust in the use of AI and that we can have more societal good through the use of AI. This means sustaining this model that we have built, but also complementing it with other policies, like fiscal and social policies, to avoid that the extra added value created by AI will only enter the hands of a few Elon Musks. And also permanent learning. It's very crucial to boost our capability of learning and training of our population. And also, if I look at specifically the European perspective, we need an industrial policy, we need research, common research, we need to be united enough to compete with China and US for sure. And this entails much more policy than just the AI Act. So this is an overall presentation of my work and where we are and where we might go in the new mandate. I hope that the new mandate of the European institution that is just starting will focus on how to do even more to be a champion of human-centered AI as Europe. I hope Europe can really become the champion of a certain way of developing and using AI, which is our idea behind also the legislation that we authored. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Since you have to leave soon, maybe a couple of questions to you first. When you look back at the time when Parliament negotiated that piece of legislation, it was actually passed pretty quickly. It started to be developed in 2021 only, and it has now already been passed. But when you look at the process of negotiations, what were the points of contestation where you maybe adapted also the Council's approach?
Well, the most difficult parts were the prohibitions and the copyright protection, which was entailing a huge amount of interests behind. And so it was not easy. And to be frank, it's a pity that we had to bow to an obligation that comes also from the limitations of the European treaties. That is the exception for national security that is very clear in this legislation, so that also the prohibitions that I mentioned are not valid when national security is being entailed. So, but this is linked to how the European Union works. So it's based on the treaties. So this links also to a matter I think is very linked to the development of AI in Europe, that to be more effective, we also need a more united Europe with a more federal organization. This is obviously my opinion, but I want to say that because I'm really convinced that we need more federal Europe for a more competitive and strong Europe on AI. And also, I think that it's been a pity that we cannot have the fundamental rights impact assessment for all the private actors, but only for some of them, and all the public ones. That's a check on fundamental rights that is linked to the user, not the developer. And this was a big fight of the Parliament. We started that was completely out of the text, so it's already a good result. But I hope it could be more generalized and not only limited to some of the so-called deployers.
There's now a 2-year implementation period ahead. What kind of obstacles do you see for that implementation period, and where do you hope we stand in 2 years?
Well, the main problems I see are, one is the need for a lot of extra work now on standardization, on the work of establishing strong national supervisory authorities. The AI office also, we need to check it becomes strong enough to deal with the implementation of the law. And also I see the risk of strong lobbying of the big techs also in the implementation phase to dilute and to limit the impact of the text we have written. I mentioned again the copyright protection, where I'm sure there will be a huge lobbying to try to limit the actual impact of the law, because the text itself is quite strong, but it could be implemented in a way that is more limiting if they manage to do their lobbying right. But I think we should, as I did myself, listen to everyone, but not shy from being strict in applying the rules that we think are needed. And in this case, rules to protect creativity.
Thank you. Do any of you want to react to this statement before he has to leave? No? All right. Then let's move on. Francesca, do you want to start with your introductory statement?
Thank you very much. So great to be here in Berlin in presence. Also because as you kind of said at the beginning, I'm going to spend 1 year working at Mercator here in Berlin, so I feel already a bit German, actually. A bit, yes. So since Brando has given the kind of zoom in into the AI regulation and the AI Act, I maybe like to start with some thinking a bit on the broader agenda, where we are, and where I see, I mean, obviously this is a great moment to discuss these things. And for me, the reason why I think it's not only timely, but absolutely needed, is that, of course, since we are at the beginning of shaping a new parliament, a new commission, I mean, actually very difficult, I would say, both geopolitical moment, but also a very difficult Europe moment, I think those kind of subjects, which is AI in terms of the political economy, the geopolitics of AI, and where is the role of Europe in this space, I think it's very important to kind of set the ground for a more ambitious agenda for Europe. So I think it's the right moment to kind of build a new perspective, the right alliances, and then make our voice heard in Brussels. So I will be pretty active, I think, in my statement. So the first maybe reasoning is that, okay, there is not only the AI Act. So as we know, Europe has been kind of setting itself to be the big regulator of the digital age. So we have a kind of different rules that, some of experts have said, this is a new constitution for the digital age, and Europe will be able to show the world, how can digital be regulated. Now, I've been one of the persons in Brussels working with a variety of different institutions and authorities to kind of push this agenda forward. And I'm, of course, positive about the fact that we have a constitution for the digital age, and also that we have a set of rules that, if enforced and implemented in the right way, may be able to shift the power balance in the digital economy AI space. Because I think the reason, what we have to be asking ourselves is, what are we regulating and why? And I think obviously in this space there is a big need to reshift the power balance. I mean, me as a heterodox economist, let me say, I've been, of course, looking at digital marketplaces and the concentration of power in the digital economy for many years. And I think at this point, I'm really somehow very worried and concerned about the structural concentration of market power, which I would say is kind of approaching monopoly power problem, infrastructural concentration, which is also a question of economic and political sovereignty, in particular for Europe. And here is the biggest point, the bigger point that I want to make, and I guess this is an audience of maybe competition economists, experts, people working on regulation, understanding the technology. I guess this is an expert audience. And I want to say, because I've been, of course, engaging in Brussels many times, I think we have to be very critical with the approach, the kind of, market-making, neoliberal approach that Europe has been taking until now to regulate tech. And I think if we look at the world and what's happening around the world, we see that we are going beyond neoliberalism in that sense. I think we are going beyond the Washington consensus, and hyperglobalization reached a point of no return. So why do I say this? I mean, first of all, because we understand that only looking at market efficiency and say, okay, the market will just solve it on its own, and we'll have more market, which is going to be efficient, lower prices, and better consumer welfare. This is actually not being the case. So we have structural concentration of power at the expenses of people and the planet, which is actually what we have to take care of, yes? And I think this is very important, because at this point we are looking at, and that's not the case why Brando has been mentioning also digital industrial policy, the geopolitical landscape. I mean, if we look at some of what nations are leveraging economic statecraft in ways that I haven't seen before, tariffs. I mean, now the question of the trade war between the US and China, but also now Europe imposing tariffs on Chinese vehicles, electric vehicles, export control, big time, I mean, in technology, blacklisting specific technologies, controlling, for example, lithography when it comes to chips, and looking much more at national security questions, question of supply chain resiliency, and question of, okay, where are we directing our effort? So what I want to say is that we are going to see a much more activist approach. And I think Europe obviously has to change the posture, because otherwise, where is Europe in this space? So what I'm saying is regulation is not enough. That's to the point that we can't just keep regulating the giants, which are US giants and Chinese giants. We can't keep doing that. I think obviously it's clear that, I mean, for me at least, okay, let's enforce this regulation, let's do it well, so let's look at this. So I don't want to kind of, not talk about that. But I think there are two other steps which are, for me, very important. And the first one is how we're doing our digital industrial policy when it comes to, I think, the concentration of power in the AI stack. We're talking about vertical integration, where you have no structural decoupling in every layer of the stack. So at this point, we have very few players which are controlling the chips, the cloud, the models, the applications on top, the venture capital, and the financing. Are you happy about this? Because I mean, honestly, even as a policymaker, as a regulator, as a citizen, I'm very concerned. And why? Because of your story at the beginning. Because I mean, here it's not only a technology problem. Here we're shaping healthcare, we are shaping the way we live in cities, we are shaping the life of small businesses selling bread. We are shaping the economy and society in a broader way. And this structural concentration of power is concerning. So I would say that, okay, and I'll get to the end, I would like to see something which goes a little bit beyond, for example, okay, can we do something where we decouple who owns the cloud and who builds foundation models on top of the cloud? Can we do structural decoupling and differentiation at that level? Is this possible? Can we also maybe arrive to say that we need public options as an alternative to monopolistic models of the big tech? For example, I mean, Europe is doing something very interesting, which is providing public cloud. As we know, we are investing massive amount of billions of taxpayer money into building supercomputing and cloud systems. Then we want to open up to startups, to innovators, to the economy, to society at large, to build applications that really serve public needs and according to EU laws. And my work has been very strongly, for example, advocating for the need of public interest data. So all the data that we produce that serve to take public decisions in healthcare, in mobility, in education, in cities and so on, can we maybe, mandate access to this data and then keep this data as managed in a public trust with rules that are not basically just feeding the giants, the AI engines of big tech giants. So I'm just putting there some options that I think go beyond what we are seeing now, but somehow I also see that the EU, for example, and this is not only in the EU, I think we're going to have to do a lot of alliances with the US, with the Global South, very importantly so, because we have a massive problem in supply chains and critical raw materials, extractivism and so on. But I end by saying, I think we need to enlarge our imagination. It's not good enough for Europe to just build AI, like in the US, with some EU rules on top because we are more ethical. No. I think we have to actually do it differently according to our needs, what we want as a society, and the economic models that we want to build that are not such concentration of market power, economic power, and social power. Because, and I end really, the impact here is on our liberal democracy. I mean, what Brando says, we don't want the Elon Musk, we are having that. We are having that, they control all the stack, they actually also now rallying against liberal democracy in a very active way. So I think what's at stake is a democracy in Europe. So that's why I'm saying, okay, we can do it, we have a lot of tools, but we maybe need to be more ambitious and build the right alliances to build an agenda which is specific to our needs and where we want to get as a society. Sorry, I took a bit of time.
That's fine. There was a lot in there, and we will unravel that later. Alina, from your point of view, where are we right now?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'm super tempted to talk to Francesca now, but we will do that in the discussion. And also your statement is very helpful to me because I won't be talking about the power imbalance now. That is something that I was going to cover as well. And I think we are actually fairly in alignment. So let's see if we can find something interesting to talk about later.
It's allowed to agree.
Yes, but sometimes you feel that you have to come up with a, with a conflict. So let's not. Let's agree. I even want to go a step even broader than we've been so far and ask, why are we even thinking about all of these things, including regulation in the first place? And as an ethicist, I will say that what happens when we start to think about how to shape our societies, how to shape our lives, but also how to regulate things, including technology, regulation is crystallized ethics. So first we have to discuss the ethical implications and aspects and issues, and then we can build good regulation out of that. And so I used to be chair until very recently. I know that is a very contested point, and I'm very happy to discuss it later. It always, anybody who is a regulator or a legal scholar gets triggered by that, which is why I love to put it at the beginning. Apologies. I used to head, as you've introduced, a body, the German Ethics Council, and we put out a big report because we agree that it's currently such a vital topic. And the 400 pages of this report, all of it is publicly available, can be summarized in 2 lines in an ethical rule of thumb, which says any application of artificial intelligence must extend and enhance human agency and flourishing and may not diminish it. AI cannot replace humans. So that is obviously a complete no-brainer. It's a very, very short and simple rule of thumb. And what we then do is we drill down, what does that actually mean in application? What does that mean if we apply a rule like that to the various areas of applications that we have? We have medicine, we have schools and education, we have public administration, and we have public, mainly digital debate. What this rule also shows is that it has this element of highlighting that we have the same technology that has enormous potential and enormous potential benefits to us, and of course also a destructive capacity and a destructive potential. As you all know, I'm sure you've talked about these examples already, this very same technology can help us shorten the time that we need to find the protein structure of new medicines, say for chemotherapy in cancer treatment, and shorten it from years. It used to take years to compute the protein structure. And you know, something like AlphaFold does that in hours now, right? So that's an enormous jump ahead for anybody who has anything to do with medical research, such as I myself have, and many people who work on AI in medicine. And at the same time, that a very similar algorithm to that has been used or has been shown, has performed at a conference in Switzerland in January last year. Some of you will be aware of that. And computed 40,000 toxic bioweapons in a few hours. So that's a true dual-use technology, right? You can kill a lot of people, you can heal a lot of people with the same thing, which tells you two things. First of all, you can't ban it unless you're happy to say no to all the benefits, which I don't think there's an agreement on that. And the second thing it tells you is you must regulate. Absolutely. So there has been this talk of don't regulate this, just let it develop, let it grow. And that's, of course, absolutely impossible with a dual-use technology. So that is what's the background of this rule of thumb. Second thing I want to say is we wanted to highlight with the rule of thumb like this that can then be applied, that we have a lot of applications already there with lots of issues. So you're very well aware of the applications that produce mistakes. So the question of quality that you mentioned. You're all aware of the applications that produce discriminatory results, the fairness issue. You're all aware of all the bias problem, the transparency issues, all of that. And we look at a very big number of examples to show that all these ethical principles, because they're all ethical principles, are currently not really applied in a lot of these currently available applications. And so I must say that I'm actually very happy with the AI Act. I haven't looked at the very final version. If anybody has it, please send it to me. I still have one on my computer that has all the hundreds of pages of comments and stuff. Yeah, I know, but I'm like, can I have it a little earlier than that? So if anybody can send me the file, that'd be great. But overall, I'm very happy with the risk-based approach and with the fact that it covers all of these things, because we've been working on that for 10 or 15 years collectively, and you can tick the boxes, it's all there. But then there's two other things, and I do want to echo what Francesca has said. Regulation isn't enough. And we say two other things. The rule that this short rule is based on 200 pages of looking at what is actually intelligence, what is creativity, what is responsibility, what is action, what is intention, and what is consciousness. So very philosophical stuff. And we say, if we keep this narrative that AI is as good or will very soon be as good as human intelligence, we devalue our human intelligence. Because even if we have broad general AI, the way it's currently being built, our form of intelligence is way more. It's embodied, it's emotional, it's social. By its very nature, it is all of these things, and it's historical. So I know, again, that's a very contested point, very happy to unpack it in the discussion. And the final thing I want to say, and these things are not something that regulation can in any way grasp, but we should be very keen on reminding ourselves that we don't get too narrow with our understanding of AI, that we need to broaden it out, that we need to sort of not undervalue what it is that we're actually talking about, which is how do we want to live our lives? How should societies work? And the final point is tied to that. And that, again, is something that regulation by itself cannot address. That is that we need to have technology development, and particularly this very powerful dual use technology development in the right direction. And currently, I get asked all the time, is it bad, is it good? And I always say, well, it depends on what we do with it, but currently it's mostly out of our control, as Francesca has said, so that's the first problem. And the second problem is, even where it's under our control, it seems to be sort of just happen in many cases, because I know this, I'm from a technical university, I work with developers on these things, we co-develop algorithms, we curate data sets, so we're actually in the middle of this. And it's like, I have this data set, let's build an algorithm. What can I do with it, right? That's how it works. Many times, and lots of great stuff comes out of it, but that's not how we can do this. We have to say as societies, but also as those who sort of will now be working with industry, with institutions, sort of saying, look, this is the kind of application that we need, right? We're getting into a situation of demographic change. We don't have enough people to work in many areas. So these are the kinds of things we need to say what it is that we want. What is the goal? Where do we want to direct this? And again, that's very difficult to do with regulation, because you don't want to stifle sort of free development, also free research development. But we have to make sure, I keep telling my developers, why do you want to build an AI algorithm to take over counseling in hospitals? How do you say that? Seelsorge. Right? I mean, that is like this, with what I've been saying about the human factor that we have. How is that a great idea to start with that first? Build me a bloody algorithm that will do the doctor's notes, right? And that will take away the administrative burden that we have. And the best phrase, and that's my final line, that I have found on this recently online, I have to cite this because I do believe it captures something very important, and I don't know how we will get it done and how we will make sure that that happens, that doesn't happen, but I think it's incredibly important regarding sort of the direction and the goals of these technologies is, I'm forgetting her name, is so embarrassing, is a young tech developer who said, I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so I can do art and poetry. I don't want AI to do art and poetry so I can do my laundry and dishes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I totally agree. I want AI to do my laundry so I can be a journalist.
I want it to do my taxes. That's my main point.
Emma, I saw you nodding at a couple of points. Please don't agree too much, because then maybe we really do have too much agreement. But this is your turn. Please set the stage from your perspective.
Wonderful. I'll try to underscore any points of disagreement. Am I audible?
You're audible, and I can see you. So for later on in the conversation, if you want to jump in, just give me a sign.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I guess I want to go back to, there's a little bit of an echo, but anyway, I want to go back to the kind of provocations that Francesca laid out, and just, I think maybe, Francesca, you've probably experienced this in many rooms already, but the one thing that we often experience when we try to launch an alternative to the current policy paradigm is, but what about innovation? And it seems like a sort of innocent question, but, it's actually a very damaging one, because what has happened, particularly in the US, but I would say everywhere, and certainly in Europe as well, is that innovation in the tech sector and digital innovation more broadly has collapsed into AI for a lot of people. And worse still, it has collapsed into generative AI. In a room I was in last week, we couldn't, for love of God or money, we couldn't get people to think beyond chatbots, right? And I kept thinking, like, how did we get here? And so I think one thing to really come back to is to try to have these conversations without the kind of path dependency that current industry forces have set us on, which sort of always make sure that we're playing on their terms. And, you know, Aline, I think you gave really a kind of interesting example right now about the health sector and nurses. I actually think that one of the boldest policy statements we've seen over the last 18 months hasn't come from think tanks like us, nor the, you know, more than 50 legislation that, you know, legislative documents that are sort of languishing in the US Senate. It's actually come from the National Nurses Union, whose AI Bill of Rights is so striking, most importantly, because it actually rejects the notion that AI innovation is innovating for healthcare at all, because it situates the value of care at the center of what healthcare should do and systematically explains how AI tools that are being pushed into hospitals by some of the largest companies are not in furtherance of that goal. And so, in other words, they're sort of rejecting the premise. And I think like what I wanted to focus on today as someone that spends, I guess, most of my time thinking about AI and AI regulation is to try to materially and with a focus on the supply chain, explain why this particular paradigm of large-scale AI, you know, some people might refer to it as foundation models, or generative AI is the more colloquial term, is really nothing more than the product of concentrated power in the tech industry. And so my friend and colleague Meredith Whittaker has a great line on this, which is that what we're actually seeing is concentrated power marketed as intelligence. And so, you know, I think in some ways people colloquially understand that there is no AI without big tech, but I think there's a way in which that problem, and I've seen this in Brussels more than elsewhere, is bucketed as narrowly a concern of competition law. So the conversation that will take you to is one of the DMA, but really one of our big learnings, again, I advise the Federal Trade Commission, the US regulator, across consumer protection, privacy, and competition. And one of our key learnings on AI was that AI is a kind of whole of government policy integrated approach. And the reason is that market concentration is not narrowly a competition law problem, but, you know, to Brando's point earlier, it could make all of our broader policy efforts on transparency, auditing, and even speech regulation moot if we don't contend with kind of market concentration and the kind of regulatory and other levers it affords these companies. So I keep promising that I'm going to come back to the AI stack. So let me just get into it. I think it's useful to split apart AI, which is a kind of big, overwhelming term, into its material components. And that's also how the Department of Justice and the FTC are kind of categorizing their interventions. They say that it is much better to kind of you know, disaggregate the AI stack and the AI supply chain into all of the parts that go into making AI possible. So compute and cloud infrastructures, data, models, and of course, labor, talent, and capital that is undergirding all of this. Now, if we zoom into the compute part of the AI stack for a minute, and I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds because I think it's important. I think we should start understanding that as its own sort of mini stack with chips and software, cloud, and data infrastructure. And what's useful to remember is that, you know, AI has a sort of 70-year history, but one of the most pivotal moments in that journey was in 2012 with AlexNet. And many people have sort of gone back to that moment where we saw massive advances in computer vision technology and said, what changed? Was it like breakthrough models? Like what happened in 2012 that changed the paradigm for deep learning? And really what the answer is, which has now been established by several papers, is that all this was an advance in the scale of compute and data. So essentially, this is a paradigm that is constituted by scale and that requires a kind of degree of computational intensity and data intensity that we've never seen before. And if you throw more compute and data at a model, it will likely get better in the kind of narrow performance benchmarks that industry currently privileges. And all this is important because, you know, there really isn't a kind of viable alternative to tech giants for this reason, because AI is super computationally expensive. It's not a like do it yourself in your garage kind of, you know, technological paradigm. And I think one example that we, you know, love to give to kind of understand the scale of compute costs is to really compare it to government public compute projects. So the EU innovation package, I think, estimates around 3 billion over a few years. The US government has committed to spending 2.5 billion on its public compute project. 53 billion is what AWS just spent last quarter in Northern Virginia alone on upgrading its data centers, right? So the cost and scarcity of these computing resources is shaping who can build AI and what kind of AI gets built. And what's very important about cloud and compute, and I think this infrastructure layer of the stack, is to not just think about it in terms of being an input for AI, but also thinking about it as the only path to a viable business model. So for one, the hype around AI has already driven demand for 3 cloud companies, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. And it has also sort of, funnily enough, or maybe not so surprisingly, it is exactly those 3 companies that accounted for 2/3 of the kind of, funding that went to startups last year. So essentially, the cloud is the way in which they're making money off of this, so-called AI revolution, but they're also funneling back into the kind of AI application layer to ensure that they get to pick winners and losers for what is successful. And most importantly, they get visibility and the ability to shape how this market goes forward. And I think we're seeing this a little bit, with Apple and others. What these tech companies also have is access to the consumer and access to kind of monetizable markets. So one of the things about like prompt-based generative AI is that it works really well as a kind of plug-and-play add-on, which on the one hand can entice longer and bigger and more profitable cloud contracts for the companies I mentioned, but for other companies like Meta that are platform companies, or for hardware giants like Apple, the profit from AI, is clear because it's going to be sort of integrated as feature enhancers or optimization solutions in their existing offerings. And just this week, we heard that, Apple didn't actually even pay OpenAI for ChatGPT integration, right? It already has the most valuable captive consumer audience that no money can buy. And so that's what they offered. So anyway, I think the long story short, and I could tell you a very kind of similar story on data. But I think what I will say to kind of close, and also in relation to the data point, is that it's useful to think of AI as a kind of continuation of the failures to regulate and I think to really imagine the tech industry over the last 10 years, because the most valuable unstructured data sets that reside with these very few companies today are based on essentially a decade of largely unchecked data collection, essentially the public's data on which they are now being able to like harvest for new applications. So it is thanks to the lack of primarily US regulation on data protection and on competition that these dominant companies could establish their position on the backs of the surveillance business model. And now we are kind of sitting with, as I said at the start, the product of this kind of concentration of power, data, and computational and capital resources in very few companies. So I'll sort of leave you with that somewhat, I guess, maybe not the most pessimistic view, but I think it's good to level set there to say that I'm less interested in thinking through how we can pierce through this current paradigm, because I think this current paradigm is set up to further the interests of very few companies. I'm much more energized by conversations about how we can build alternative paradigms that get out of this focus on generative and large-scale AI altogether.
All right, thank you very much. I want to get back to the AI Act, but I want to pick up on a couple of points that you've raised and maybe develop them further. So Francesca and Emma, you've both mentioned the point in time where we are and the problem of concentration that is not really addressed by the current legislation here in the EU. And you've both made it clear that it builds on the deficits from the last digital revolution and the concentration we have seen there. So how would you tackle this? How would you break it up, Francesca, if you were the boss of the European Union.
Yeah. I mean, I think, first of all, maybe just to expand on this with some examples. The first one, also referring to what Amba said, because I feel I'm also aligned with that, and I understand it takes a bit of courage and a bit of also like, okay, we really want to set a kind of autonomous path for our growth. Kind of claim, which I think it's good in these times, because I mean we see the failures of the current economic models. Think about climate, think about the kind of geopolitical scenario, inequalities, and so on. So I think it's actually a good moment to say, as a continent, we want to have our own path for economic growth, development, and so the technological paradigm. But I think we also have to understand, for example, one point about, okay, Europe is captured. Yes, I mean, we know that this is the case. For example, our kind of digital, strategic autonomy or digital sovereignty. I mean, we also seen how this, let's say, digital sovereignty claim in the case of the AI Act. Sorry, I don't want to play the pessimism. I mean, I also want to play the kind of what are the alternatives, so I'll get there. But while Amba was speaking, I remember during the AI Act, for example, we had the case of Mistral, yes, this startup scale-up from France, and France was like, oh yeah, they were really halting on regulating foundation models because, oh, we can't fail on competition. We also need our own champions, and this is the European champions, and we need to compete with the US. Now, we went to see, and now there are documents that expose the fact that Mistral, during the AI regulation, was dealing with Microsoft, so they had actually an arrangement with Microsoft, and if you look at Mistral and the shareholders, there's nothing European about Mistral. I'm sorry, I break you the news. No, it's not a European company. It's born in Silicon Valley, spin-off technologies. The main shareholders are US companies, and the same concentration of power we see actually across. I've been the president of the Italian National Innovation Fund, working also with the European Investment Fund on funding, European deep tech companies. And I've seen, the concentration of power in this space of, VCs and how the big tech are playing the VCs game, as Amba was saying, also because they have visibility across the stack and they control, almost like where they invest, and then they create these huge, market advantages. This is an issue. And then Mistral, sorry to insist, the person that they employed to lobby with the EU regulators against the AI Act was the former digital minister of France. And we see this all the time. So you see like big, EU regulators, maybe in DG Comp, which now are working, advising these big tech companies. So I'm saying maybe we should break this pattern if we want to find a path that really benefit the public interest and see what are the problems in this concentration. So I think we have to start from this fact. Another thing also applied to the actual problems is the question of data. For example, in my work, I used to be chief technology officer of the city of Barcelona, and I worked and I continue to work. I worked actually with the city of Hamburg and many cities when I was working with the UN on building digital twins and smart city models to solve concrete problems of citizens, mobility, pollution, healthcare, housing, for example, affordable housing, things that are really important for people. I can tell you, as a policymaker working hands-on on these problems, it's almost like you don't have any more the knowledge and the capacity to build, to respond to what citizen needs, also because all this knowledge and this data, it's not in the public sector anymore. It's not in public hands. So I'm saying, like, this is actually really concrete. That's why I started to work on data trust, and I put clauses on public procurement contracts to mandate that the data that taxpayers' money pay with public contracts are public data. They should be kept as public data that then, yes, you can put up in a data trust and you mandate access to this data for public interest purposes. But otherwise, this data that we need to, solve pollution, mobility, housing, and so on, we don't have it anymore. It's in the hands of these companies. So I think those are kind of concrete problems that, you know, that's why I'm also very passionate to say we need an alternative model. I mean, what we are seeing, this massive concentration in big tech, but also the Chinese model with massive concentration of state power over data, it's not really our way. I think, you know, if also we want to align the capacity to build the technology stack that we need to the EU regulation, we have to build our capacity and we have to build a technological ecosystem that's maybe not this concentrated AI paradigm that we're seeing now, but yeah, an alternative one. And I end by saying we are investing a lot of money into that. I mean, digitizing Europe, just to get to the European point, together with the Green Deal, is the two priorities of our common agenda. And I think, I mean, well, maybe the right wing is getting stronger and stronger and the Green Deal is diluted. I mean, think that, you know, we should start caring about the fact that, you know, anyways, these are things really important for us and they go together. But, you know, I think we can, 20% of Next Generation EU was invested in digitizing Europe. So we're massively investing in these infrastructures. If we don't get it right, for example, putting clauses in public procurement contracts, you know, digital industrial policies with conditionalities, so the money doesn't only go to the big tech company to reinforce the kind of paradigm. If we don't do this right now, we are losing the train. I don't think we'll get there anymore because we are investing a lot of money and because this is the moment to show that we have, maybe, I don't know, sometimes people refer to the India stack as digital public infrastructure that we want. I think this is not also that it's not the European model. We need something else also to that, but I think we do need digital public infrastructures that work for us. And maybe I close with a little anecdote. Since I moved here in Berlin, I mean, this is really short. I mean, also basic things about digitizing our bureaucracy, make it work for people, don't actually work. And I mean, maybe we should start fixing that, tailored to what people actually need to a better life that we can live as a community instead of, oh my God, we have to invest more into the AI of Sam Altman, so he's gonna scan our iris and he's gonna give us tokens. Jesus, I mean, honestly, this is, first of all, should be banned by law in Europe. And second of all, maybe this is not the technologies we need. How about we start with making, a less bureaucratic, more digital public infrastructure that serve the welfare needs of European citizens? How about that?
Alina wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love the passion. That's fantastic. And I just want to add to what you've said. One of the fascinating points is that we say in our papers something very modest, that we might actually think about the fact that it's a good idea to have some digital infrastructure in public hands. And you get ridiculed when you say that. It's regarded as incredibly naive. And the question that we've been getting, not just myself, over and over again on panels and presentations and so on is, but you know, this has never worked. And we've been talking about the European internet for 20 years and we've been talking about this and that and it's never going to work. How will you have, I don't know, example, European Twitter, or how will you have a European cloud and so on? And of course, the answer to that is, yeah, well, okay. Should we then just let it go? And that would be horrific. So I really want to just emphasize the point that now's the time. And if we don't get it done, then it will be over. And the second thing I want to say is that there are historical examples. Some of you know that the current situation is being called the new Gilded Age. Right? These billionaires and sort of the concentration of market power, these monopolies that we're seeing, are very similar to a time, end of the 19th century in the US. And there was regulation to break that up. You have the Sherman Act. I'm not an expert on that, and there might be experts in the room here on such legislation, but it's not unheard of. You know, countries went and said, look, this is a concentration of power. We have that was against the rubber barons, as you know, right? It was rail, it was coal, it was oil, some of it. And it was supposed to implement more competition and break up these huge conglomerates that had evolved, that were not looking after people at all anymore. And I've been in many sessions over the last year or two with, let's say, red-blooded capitalists, right? So really not even heterodox economists. I mean, I hear where you're coming from, but really with business people, with industry people, Arbeitgeberverbände, right? Not the people where you would expect them to be critical of capitalism. And I'm starting to hear things like that. Starting to hear, okay, look, we're in a dysfunctional situation. And this is nothing against the capitalist system, is what they say. And, you know, we love the capitalistic system as such, but it's gone too far. So let's look at some of the examples in the past, possibly, and use them for our approaches today. So that's pretty much all I want to remind us of, because I think we've not just been captured, as you've so aptly put it, we're sort of hostages. And even emotionally, you can't even say it without being ridiculed. And I think that is an amazing accomplishment by the tech sector. Kudos to them. I mean, you gotta get to a situation like that. That I bow my head, right? But it really sucks for many people and for our societies. And I think it's very important to shift. I hate the phrase, but I guess it's the best term for it. We have to shift the mindset on that and start asking again, how can we break this up so it generates real value for people?
Amalie, you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. I think a lot is already been covered. To answer your question on like what can we do, I think just, you know, like Francesca's listed a lot. Maybe what I will add is that there are some signals for more bold and creative enforcement and using existing levers. And we're seeing this all over the world. What we lack is, I think, the ability to actually follow through, given that these companies are always right there ready with their PR statements about how, a negative decision against them would essentially impact their interest in investing in a particular market. We saw this in the UK with Microsoft Activision. And so there are always ways in which I think companies are sort of charged to remind regulators who's boss. And in the face of that, I think what we really need is bold, courageous enforcement actions. I think based on what we are seeing right now, the FTC recently announced a probe into Inflection AI and Microsoft. The CMA also looked at Mistral Microsoft, and they said it's not a merger, which of course anyone could have told you, right? But I think the point here is that kind of looking beyond the black letter of the law, and even if the kind of limits of existing legal precedent prevent you from going all the way, I think if we have more enforcement agencies drawing attention to the limits of existing legal frameworks and existing precedent to say, we're clearly seeing a kind of ecosystem advantage that's accumulating for big tech. It doesn't fit our traditional understanding of how to identify market power, nor do these strategic so-called partnerships fit our existing understandings of problematic mergers, but we have a kind of problem on our hands and we need perhaps more creative levers to get at them. So that's one. I think in the US, we've also seen a kind of growing drumbeat towards structural separation. So the actual example of what Alina just mentioned on breaking them up, I think the most obvious one here is to make sure that the kind of infrastructure layer does not, firms are not able to repatriate profits that they're making from the infrastructure layer and kind of funneling them back or integrating them with the kind of other layers of the AI stack. So that's that bunch of I would say measures that do seem that they have teeth. Outside of competition, I think pre-market review, so you cannot go to market unless you prove X, Y, and Z, needs to be the regulatory orientation. We're seeing AI labs go to market with products like Sora or many of their other tools that don't meet basic privacy and security benchmarks. And there's a kind of, we thought that move fast and break things was stale. Apparently not. It's very much the culture of these AI labs. And so if I had to think of like, everyone is pro-regulation. Brad Smith is always like the loudest pro-regulation voice in theory. I think where that rough consensus falls apart is when you talk about things like, okay, how about we say no products released to market unless you prove certain evaluations, and those evaluations are, double-checked, or you're not essentially grading your own homework, but there's some kind of oversight. I think when you put the brakes is when we actually, I think, see companies worry a little bit. And we've seen that in the enforcement context as well. So prioritize, I think, moves that genuinely add real friction. I think we can all do with more friction, not less, when it comes to the tools that are being released in the market. And maybe the final point I've been sitting with since Alina's comments on, the kind of more existential risks associated with AI. It's just a quick anecdote that we spent most of the 18 months of since ChatGPT's release, especially in DC, overwhelmed with conversations about risks on the horizon, and how we were all going to be eaten by killer robots and all the rest of it. And in the end, including on the issue of bioweapons, the U.S. House Science Committee did a probe, and they found that actually, this whole concern of bioweapons, there was no way to verifiably prove that you could do something using LLMs that you couldn't through a normal Google search. And I think that's really damning, because the kind of the hype, not just about the benefits, but the hype about the risks, is actually fueling the bottom lines of the very same companies. And it's also therefore not surprising that you have some of these companies and their executives at the helm of the so-called risk brigade. And that's, I think, something to keep at the back of our minds.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I was thinking that too, that it's better to talk about the apocalypse than about competition restrictions. I want to stop you for a brief minute and take a couple of questions if you have any. Tommaso, yes, please. You first.
Yeah, thank you for this fascinating and very passionate discussion. I think many people, including me, share the analysis of the situation of this real problem of competition along the AI stack. I'm maybe optimistic that we have some tools that can be used in a bold way to solve some of the problems. We have competition law. It failed, I think, in the past 20 years. Things are changing on both sides of the Atlantic, so maybe there something can come. I think the issue with data is also complicated, but as you mentioned, we might have tools to think how to give access to data, data trust, and so on. Also with regulation, you can have regulation at the very top, regulating the way these systems are created. Where I really see the problem, and where I don't agree with you, Francesca, is on the computational side, where you really need the huge investment. And Amber gave some numbers, and I heard many of these numbers. There is no way that public money can match this huge investment that big tech can do. So there I'm very pessimistic that we can build a public infrastructure. Maybe we can try something, we can have small things, but nothing of the size that is needed to do what we need to do. So there I'm really stuck, and I don't know what we can do. I don't believe that a digital industrial policy can solve that problem, especially in a time where we need industrial policy to do everything, We have a climate crisis where we need industrial policy. We have resilience issues where we might need industrial policy. So I want to challenge all of you. What is the alternative to that? Because I don't believe that that can work.
Francesca, do you want to react?
Yeah, and then maybe it's interesting to see what Amba and the other things. Yes, I mean that's the most, I think, complicated part. But I think there are a couple of points here. Well, first of all these massive compute and the actual data centers built as a military programs, because that's what they are. I mean, in fact, I mean, the way they're built, the standard they use is massive, like secrecy and security and so on. And we start having more and more information about the resource extraction is massive. I mean, this is something we also have to take into account, because I was quite I was really impressed during the pandemic. We had all these problems, and then the question of the Ukraine war. I mean, politicians were saying, just, you know, don't heat up, just put fire, you know, we have not enough electricity and so on. And at the same time, people were prompting ChatGPT that was consuming more water and more electricity than what we needed to actually, you know, go through the winter. This is also not normal. So those are systems that work with extraction of resources, water, electricity, also, you know, created in areas where there is not, I mean, it's secrecy and so on. Maybe we should revise this a little bit and understand if we actually need all this massive computation. I've seen also a lot of the European Commission projects, which are very, very interesting, the supercomputing facilities that we have in Europe. Some of it we struggle to have usages that make sense. I mean, now a lot of the Commission emphasis is going to, okay, let's open up not only to researchers, let's open it up to startups, let's open it up to industry to find the use to this massive computation. Now we have, for example, it's great, the digital twin of the Earth, to model climate and to model that integrates a lot of our scientific data, also coming from the you know, from all the data infrastructure we have globally. But some of the prediction is almost like, okay, we already know that we have a massive problem with the climate. What do we do about it? So what I mean, I don't contradict you. I know even the problem of actual chips. If you look at what NVIDIA, I mean, why NVIDIA shares are growing, I mean, much more than the entire stock exchange of Germany and few other countries in Europe. Do we know why? Yes, of course, they are perfectly integrating these different layers of the stack, as Amba was saying, and they control all the different layers, and then they integrate also the software part. So not only the chips, also the software part. So that's why they're becoming so important to the market. So I wanted to get to the point that, yes, maybe it's difficult to couple that investment. We know it's difficult. But at the same time, we also have to understand, why do we need this massive extraction and this massive computing and this kind of business model on top? I'm not convinced that's what we need. And finally, I just want to say, I think an industrial policy should leverage also private investment. So it's not only, you know, but now we invest massive public money, and then the public sector take the risk while the private sector, you know, does the value extraction part. I don't think this is fair. We can't continue to invest massive public resources for the private sector to extract value on top without having any returns, public returns, when it comes to, you know, our salaries, when it comes to the environment, when it comes to a better management of our data in a more democratic way. We need these conditionalities to be part of our industrial policy. So the let's say equivalent of the Inflation Reduction Act of Europe, it's not only about giving massive, you know, tax credits and money to the industry and then let them go with it. I don't think this is good enough. This is not industrial policy as we want to do it at the moment. It's not a complete answer to your question, but...
Can I jump on it? Because I think that is the question. So I want to add to what Francesca says. This is not broadcasted, is it? Outside? It's recorded. Is it going to be public? Is it going to be publicly available? Okay, that's good to know for the phrasing.
You can cut it.
Yeah, no, that's no good. There's going to be a blip in a nice way. So the first thing is, of course, regulatory force. Again, breaking up and bold implementation. But I want to say something else. It is about the goals. And the bolder question is, so Francesca has mentioned the incredible resource intensivity of large language models, which have been in our lives for how many years now? 3, 4? Have they made our lives that much better? Where's the killer application? I know what the killer application is. The killer application has been revealed on X. It's human-like companions. Beautiful, human-like companions that will be assembled to your liking and will be indistinguishable from these pesky, annoying women that you can do anything with, that will stay home. It's going to be wonderful. So that is the killer application. That is one of the killer applications that is driving this. That is the killer application for general AI, and you know it. So I'm very sorry to say, the goals of this are not some... I would have used different language if it wasn't broadcasted. What the fuck? Those are not the goals that we should be pursuing. And large language models, which are gobbling up half of the world, are not making our lives better so far. What will make our lives better so far is more nurses, right? Is a different way of producing, and so on and so on.
But
so I'm really worried. So what? And that is not a solution, but it goes to show that there is not a very strong case to be built from any public value and any public benefit perspective to say, we need those billions, we need to match those billions. We should be questioning, should these billions be spent like this in the first place? And again, I sound like a crazy a critic of the capitalist system, which really I'm not. But I do think from an ethical and societal point of view, that is the question, cui bono? For who is it good? And it's just not a very convincing answer. Sorry.
And how would you regulate goals?
The good thing is that you can always say as an ethicist, that is not my expertise. That is the crystallization of ethics. And that's for the legal and policy people to do. But actually, I think, oh God, no, I'm not going, because I would be going wider. This is a democracy point, of course. This is a point about capture of our sort of public understanding of what states should be like and what we should use democratic power for. So I'm not going to go into that because that is an enormous topic. I will shut up. If anybody else want to come in on that.
I think Emma wanted to tell us.
Yeah, I think when you're faced with like the big sort of overwhelming question of how would you regulate for a public good standard, what even is public interest, it can seem overwhelming. But I actually think there are ways in which we have actually seen either implicitly or explicitly a vision of public benefit that is embedded in existing industrial policy moves that we've seen in many parts of the world. And in every case, it's sorely lacking. So the one, just to give you a few examples, and I think then we can think of what we do want if we don't want this. In the US, for example, I would argue that the killer app is not even emotional support agents. The killer app is literally AI weaponry, right? And so where is R&D focused, especially for general purpose AI models? It's thinking through how you can have general purpose foundation AI models that have the ability to also essentially lend themselves to military applications and national security use cases. We have studied documents coming, the national kind of AI R&D strategy of the US over the last 10 years. And if there's one consistent theme, it is this ability to be used for military context. That's one. I think the other is that, we see these sort of general statements that are made about how large-scale AI is going to, and I'm not even paraphrasing here, end poverty, cure cancer, and what was the third one? There's a third one, right? In some of these R&D industrial policy documents. But actually, we've been trying to think of like, okay, if you had $32 billion that the US government has already committed in theory to AI, and similarly in Europe, are there ways to kind of ensure that that money is not just is sort of, you know, going towards, it's sort of like going towards ends that are not pre-committed to generative AI being the solution? So one of the things we learned from this year's, you know, big NeurIPS, which is the big machine learning conference, is that researchers in that community are really worried about a research monoculture that they are saying has been propelled with big tech funding essentially taking over academia. They're saying, like, since when did everyone have to work on LLMs? There's no money for anything else. There are actually less compute intensive and other ways of developing data-driven technology, but there's no incentive to go there. So I guess I would say that like one maybe simple way to put it is, can we have regulatory instruments and industrial policy measures that are putting money where industry incentives aren't going today? And I think we want to go back to the machine learning research community and ask them a little bit, what were those research paths that you were not incentivized to take because they didn't actually line up with the incentives of the cloud providers?
Right, thank you. We are approaching the end of our time, but I think I could take one more question. And yes, I think you were second quickest.
Well, I just wanted to, well, thank you for the panel since we're at the end. This has been a really great panel. But I have to admit, I'm still a little confused about the discussion about market concentration, how it links into the Digital Markets Act. So I realize that you're talking about, as we talked about on our panel, some things that are going, you know, that aren't really aren't digital in a way, aren't digital markets. But I wonder if you could say something about that, and also how utility, maybe if you have time, how utilities might address this thing about what. Although I totally agree that we don't need these billions for the LLM. But on the other hand, we do need cybersecurity, fiber optics that wrap the planet. So whether utilities might be one of the ways to strike the balance somewhere between commercial product and government infrastructure.
Who wants to jump in? The Economist.
But what was the question about the DMA?
Well, so you were saying we aren't solving the market concentration problem, and I agree. But I'm just wondering, is there a way we can leverage the DMA to do so?
Yeah. Well, didn't you discuss it in your panel? Because I wasn't here actually in that panel. Well, I think certain things that were said, I think for me are very interesting. For example, this structural decoupling between the cloud and then the foundation models and the application on top. Can we do something about that? Because this seems to me a very important part. I mean, but I don't know what the DMA, though, could do there, but I also think somewhat the cloud looks like a public utility to me in many areas, because we're saying it's this kind of like connectivity on top of which you build essential services and so on. That's why I was saying maybe, you know, this public option, like provide compute as a public option, or, you know, declare that the cloud is a public utility, which I know this would be strongly opposed by any of the cloud providers strongly and so on. But I think those kind of conversations can happen. And then obviously the question of the structural decoupling of data, which is a question also for the DMA, because we are not really, we're not really there yet to say, for example, public interest data, can we decouple that? Can we keep that as a kind of public interest accessible resource that can be used by society and not just feed in the private cloud providers? That's another big question, I think. But those are things we kind of discussed. I think I wanted to go back to the point, it's not so much related, but it was interesting. Today there is the Pope that is speaking at the G7 about artificial intelligence. And I find it quite interesting the way he's addressing the question of cognitive pollution. That's how we called artificial intelligence, which I found that was like absolutely critical. By the way, he's advocating for a ban on autonomous weapon that goes in the direction of what Amba was saying about the military use of this technology that we're seeing more and more in action, and is actually, I think you have here organization of engineers that are advocating for the same. But going back to the Pope, and it doesn't answer the question of the DMA, but I do think we haven't discussed, maybe the DSA a bit more, but we haven't discussed here. I also sit in the board of the public TV, and I mean, the massive, also the public broadcasters now are pushed into adopting these AI models where, you know, it's like, you can imagine now they're all looking into how do we opt out for training data, the training data, opting out, and I think we have the, maybe the GDPR that could give some answer to that, but it's really weak. It's weak, like the thing that you have to opt out, and you can, you know, you have to, this is not enough also there, because like this training of the data, it's happening without your consent, without you knowing it, and then what happens is that all this culture we continuously produce, imagine for a public broadcaster, it's about video, it's about the sound we produce, it's about our basic culture, is just becoming these data feeds for the big tech clouds. So this is, I think, the fundamental problem of why maybe instead of advocating for let's build a CERN for AI or let's build a Manhattan project for AI, I think we need a Manhattan project for education and culture. I really think so, because that's what we want to build. More education, more culture, more capacity, and systems that enable us to really do what we want to do, and not like feed, you know, these AI systems that are a bit out of control. I mean, it may sound idealistic, but I actually think it's pragmatic. Can I say it? I don't think it's idealistic. I think it's pragmatic to shift resources in actual projects that enhance. Maybe there is this, you know, instead of human augmentation, we want human enhancement. And how do we do that? Through education and culture.
Yeah, thank you very much. Perfect closing remarks. Thank you very much for this very lively discussion. And I will just briefly hand it over to Hannes Ulrich for closing remarks and further housekeeping.
Well, so yeah, this is unplanned, but no matter. So thanks a lot for everyone to come here, especially the speakers that are coming from abroad or elsewhere. We're happy that you've moved to Berlin, at least for a while. So maybe there'll be some additional contacts in the near future. And also thanks for staying throughout the day. So I hope this was a nice event for everyone. And yeah, so we hope there'll be some more exchanges among any of you and us in the crowd. And so travel home safely.